So I felt the need to make this video because later down the line I can foresee this argument keep on cropping up in response to my future videos. The objective of this video is to put to rest any arguments against resource-based economies regarding human nature, and with that said, let's begin. So a couple of videos back, I talked about human nature as one of the most prolific arguments against any type of major change in social structures and in economic models, but I felt that I could go into a bit more detail on this topic, just to really kind of put the argument to rest. So the first point I wanted to make about human nature or human behaviour is how it is incredibly dynamic and adaptable and flexible. The modern human has lived on Earth for around 200,000 years, and in that time we have lived in and experienced many different cultures that have all had different social systems, different values, etc. Early hunter-gatherer societies, for example, were very communal and believed in sharing the resources that they could gather, whereas today we live in a hyper-individualistic world where we have this notion of property and ownership, which kind of took hold during the Neolithic Revolution. Much of human civilization kind of made the Neolithic jump, as you could call it, whereas pockets of society still remained as hunter-gatherer tribalistic communities, and this is why you see today regular Americans living alongside Native Americans, and you see Brazilian populations living alongside the famous Amazonian tribes. Human societies can take many forms depending on the circumstances of the time, such as the surrounding environment, for example, and perhaps what resources are available to you. 12,000 years ago, pockets of human beings living in the Arab Peninsula, for example, might have thought that since they live in an environment of scarcity, they might have thought, hey, we need organised agriculture and a division of labour. We need to settle down in order to survive. And so that's how they transcended the hunter-gatherer culture. They felt the need to. Whereas if you're talking about indigenous people living in Central Africa or the Amazon rainforest, for example, where there is a lot of lush, dense greenery, where there is an abundance of natural resources, those hunter-gatherer societies didn't really feel the need to transcend into a civilizational state because they already live comfortably in natural abundance. This kind of proves that human nature isn't really a barrier to creating a diverse range of human societies. In fact, because of our adaptability to our environment, different outcomes are pretty much inevitable. So I conclude this point with saying that human nature, or more specifically human behavior, is highly permeable, especially to its environment. For my next point, I wanted to address the age-old debate as to whether human beings are naturally competitive or cooperative. While it might seem that human beings are inherently a competitive and selfish species, this kind of behaviour only exists because we live in a society that encourages such. Many years ago, when we lived in hunter-gatherer societies, we lived much more communally and we cooperated with each other to survive. Because populations were vastly lower than they were today, we lived in a state of natural abundance, and didn't have to compete for natural resources. However, today, from youth to adulthood, we have to compete in our education, in order to compete for a job, in order to get the resources and goods we need to survive. This environment of artificial scarcity creates a sense of urgency in our minds, and thus encourages us to be selfish and buy more things and accumulate as much as we can. These two types of behaviours are closely mirrored by the bonobo and the chimpanzee, which both have a 99% similar genetic makeup to humans. A few thousand years ago, a river separated a species of common chimp in the region of Central Africa. North of the Congo River were chimpanzees, who shared their environment and their habitat with gorillas. Sustenance was more scarce in this region, and the result of this scarcity led to a hyper-competitive chimp society with dominant patriarchal power structures. Additionally, chimps are often agitated and will often rouse conflict between each other over resources. This type of behaviour is diametrically opposed to what we see south of the river. Bonobo societies have been observed to have egalitarian and matriarchal power structures. They have been known to cooperate and share food with each other, and all these behaviours are at least partially attributed to their naturally abundant environment. I'll leave a link in the description, but in essence this shows that more competitive societies often stem from environments of scarcity, and cooperative and peaceful societies often stem from environments of abundance. This brings me to my third and final point for this video. If you really wanted to throw all the arguments about human nature or human behaviour as a barrier to anything out the window, then look no further than instances of feral children. These people are those who have escaped modern civilization and have decided to grow up and live amongst the wilderness. Some feral peoples have also been nurtured into believing they are an entirely different creature altogether. Case in point, a famous example of this was a Ukrainian girl by the name of Oksana Malaya, who escaped into the wild and lived most of her childhood among wolves. The end result of this was her adopting pretty much canine-like behaviour. However, since then, she has been assimilated into modern society. This pretty much proves that there's no kind of codified, cookie-cutter set of behaviours that human beings have to follow. Instead, our behaviour is shaped by the material conditions around us. With all of this said, I hope that in this video I have proved to anyone watching that any arguments citing human nature as a barrier to systemic change are completely falsifiable, and that transitioning into an RBE, where people will be provided with access to an abundance of resources, will actually improve human behaviour, somewhat mirroring that of the bonobo societies I mentioned earlier in this vid. In my next video, I will be talking about redefining what is known as the non-aggression principle, often promoted by ANCAPs, and how we can actually apply it in an RBE type society. But until then, make sure you share this video, especially with those who might argue against resource-based economies from a human nature standpoint. And if you want to see more content, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.